Uh-oh.
Oh, man.
Oh, shit.
Hey everybody, this is Bart Hansen for Crush Live Poker, and today I want to take a look at the original GOAT of poker, Phil Ivey, because with some of the stuff that's been going on over at the Hustler Casino Live show the past few weeks, I think people might have forgotten about the fact that that all started because Phil Ivey actually played in the game 2 times that week before the controversy happened. So it was sort of Phil Ivey week. Now, I had the opportunity to commentate on the second night, but David Tuckman and Billy DGAF commentated on the first night. We didn't really see a whole lot from Phil. He's played pretty tight on these shows. Sometimes he seems a little bit disinterested because they take his phone away, and I know maybe he might do a lot of sports gambling on the side. So a lot of times he is walking, but I was able to pick 3 hands that I thought were fairly interesting. And as a scheduling note, when you are watching this, I will be playing on the show today on Thursday, October 20th, and I'll be commentating on the Hustler Casino Live show on the 21st. So definitely check that out as I will be heading off to LA here once again.
All right. Ivy's got a good hand on the button.
Raise 5,400.
The 1600 is on.
That's me 2 times in a row.
2, 4, 8, 16.
54.
Yep.
This game is
I checked dark.
beyond massive.
Yeah,
Chicken in the dark.
it's officially out of the muck.
So this first hand is from the first night with Tuckman and Billy commentating. And in this particular spot, Eric Persson had actually put on another straddle. So it was 200, 400, 800, 1600 with a 400 ante. So just a crazy, crazy amount of dead money. And they were playing almost $500,000 effective. So it gets folded around here to Phil. And as I've talked about many times before, you don't just have the right to open a whole lot of hands in these multiple blind configurations because you're raising into a bunch of hands that are basically unseen. Now, it does get folded around a person, and he's actually getting quite a price here, even with the 3.5x open. It's 3,800, 8,800 for him to call. So he's getting, 2.5 to 3 to 1 here. He has a suited hand, and it is a button open, so he decides to defend. I think it's probably pretty close. I mean, I don't think it's like way too far out there in terms of how wide you could be.
Look at that. Eric defends the Jack 5, hits top pair. Check, check.
So the flop comes out Jack of Spades, 6 of Clubs, 7 of Hearts. And you can see here that Eric has flopped top pair. He's not going anywhere. And Phil has missed, but he does have a backdoor nut flush draw. He does have also a backdoor straight draw. I think it's probably pretty close. He does have some showdown value here too. I think I might mix some betting in here with checking. One of the things that I noticed though is that Phil actually checked behind in quite a few hands, probably more so than what is kind of a newer school thought of continuation betting, wide range sort of with small sizing and a large volume of hands. I really might bet here with the backdoor flush draw, but he decides to check it back, and we're on to the turn.
Look at this turn card.
Yeah, I mean, just in case he was behind, the all-world turn card. Okay, so according to Patrick Woodup, David Benjamin grinds the 10-20 game at Commerce. Okay.
So the turn comes out the 4 of Hearts, and obviously it puts a backdoor heart draw out there. And now Eric Persson has a flush draw and top pair, and he is going to come out and he is going to bet 7,600 into 12.6. So it gets back over to Phil, and he's getting almost 3 to 1 here. I think that this one is really close. I mean, I think that the more connected the board, the more likely it is that your opponent might hold some sort of pair. I mean, obviously, Eric could be betting with just a 5 here. He could be betting hearts, but it's just very hard on this particular board for him to not have at least an open-ended straight draw because of the distribution of boards, or a pair. And if he has a pair, ace-queen is doing terribly against a hand that is a pair. Now, it's not like the board's double flush where he could be betting with, say, 2 flush draws or something like that. I mean, you'd have to really reach in the weeds here for you to have the best hand. Like if Persson was betting like king 8 or something like that, or king 5. I'm all for checking back sometimes with good ace high types of holdings and then calling across turns, but I think I probably would have just given up here if I was Phil. The other thing too is if you're trying to set up maybe a plan for a bluff at the end with hearts, it's better to have a heart in your hand. Like if, for example, you had the ace of hearts and maybe the queen of hearts, you know, to a lesser extent. But getting some pot odds, Phil does make the call, and now we're on to the river.
Ivey calls.
Eric hits the flush.
He's going to bet a lot here. Ivey will snap fold.
29,600.
That's 29,600.
So the river comes out the 10 of hearts, and now 8-9 comes in, front door hearts come in. I mean, there's literally no way that Ivey is pretty much ever going to have the best hand unless he's up against some sort of hand with a 5 in it that's not paired. So the pot's 27,800, and this is sort of going to be a common thing that we'll see in the next hand here too. Eric decides to overbet here at the end. So he's going to overbet the river, sort of representing definitely better than a 1-pair hand. And that's exactly what he has. I mean, he's backed in here to a flush. Personally, if I were Eric, the way that Ivey has played this, I probably wouldn't have taken this type of sizing because it seems like Ivey kind of has, you know, a hand with a little bit of showdown, but probably not strong enough to bet on the flop. So you don't really want to take this type of sizing and to try to get called by ace highs and things like that. I didn't really see Ivey do a whole lot of checking with like aces, kings, that type of thing. Now, if I'm Phil and this guy overbets the river here, I'm just done with it unless I had the ace of hearts in my hand. So again, I am absolutely not one to question the GOAT of poker, but I don't want to mince words here. I do this with any type of player. I don't know how much recent live cash Phil Ivey has played, but from what I have seen, especially with these players on Hustler Casino Live, overbets usually lean towards strength. Now, theory-wise, they lean towards polarity, meaning very strong or very weak, but this is just one that I'm going to be done with if I decided to call the turn.
Seconds.
I'll show you a card for 10,000.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
Raise it
man.
Oh shit. I call.
110. Keep going.
You got it.
Ivey finally went for it.
Why you gotta bluff me?
Couldn't help it.
I was very, very surprised, especially the way that Phil had been playing close to the vest when I went back and reviewed this hand, and he decides to raise. And he is basically raising about a pot size raise here. I mean, he made it 110,000, just under 4x. And again, you kind of want to leave that for spots where you have the ace of hearts so that your opponent can't have the nuts, or at least having a heart in your hand. I really don't know if Phil thought that he picked up on something with Persson, because I haven't seen Persson make a whole lot of overbet bluffs in this spot. So, you know, it's one thing if Persson were to say block bet the river like a quarter pot, 1/3 pot, trying to get value from some sort of top pair or 2-pair, and then you think you can take it away from him. But with this large bet, he's actually representing a whole lot of strength, and this is just absolutely not the hand that I would have taken here for a bluff raise. Obviously, Persson makes the snap call, and then we get a little bit of the speech play. So the next hand here was actually played earlier in the night, and we're not going to get the commentary for this one because I've gone in and blacked out the hands, which people seem to really, really like when I do this, and we're going to play it out of Phil Ivey's spot. By the way, if you like what you see here. And when we do black out these hands, please hit that like button. It helps us, and subscribe to the channel. So in this particular one, we're dealing with an $800 straddle at 1-2-4 with a 400 big blind ante. And this is going to be against Rysuke, and they're about 198,000 effective. So it gets folded around here to Ivey in the hijack, and he's got 7-6 of clubs, and he is going to open it up for a raise to 3,000, so just under 4x, and it gets folded around to Rysuke, who is in the 800, and he's going to make the call with an unknown hand, and we go heads up here to the flop. Phil here flops a flush draw. You can see it's king of spades, 3 of clubs, 9 of clubs. Decent flop, pretty good board here to make a continuation bet, especially with his tight image. And I think what I would think about it is sort of planning ahead in this hand. If you're playing with a super tight image, and by far Ivey had the tightest image at the table, I'm going to think about definitely double barreling here, and possibly even triple barreling, even though you don't in theory want to have front door clubs. Remember, the straddle can be very wide. We saw that last time with Persson defending with Jack 5. So just because Rysuke calls the flop, if we bet, doesn't mean that he necessarily has to have a king. I think that sort of the bad cards might be sort of the Broadway cards in between a king or a 9. I would absolutely start a bet here, and that's exactly here what Ivey did. He started a bet of 3,000. This is sort of in between sizing that you don't really see reflected all that much nowadays. Now these guys are deep, but he takes the half pot sizing, and Rysuke is going to think about it for a while, and he is going to make the call. And with the pot being 13,100, now we are off here to the turn, and the turn is the 7 of diamonds. So now Phil pairs his 7. Now, for the same reasons that I was talking about, that I would be double barreling a lot of cards that weren't between, say, like a king or a 9, or of course, maybe the 9 pairs or something like that. A 7's a great card for us because in essence, it is a blank, and we also pick up additional equity here. We pick up additional equity against a king. Like if Rysuke were to have, say, like king 5, something like that, we've picked up additional outs. We can hit our trips, we can hit 2 pair, and obviously we can hit a flush. So I think that this is a very, very good card to double barrel, and I very well might go over the size of the pot here. I might go 15,000, something like that. Remember, you want to get a 9 to fold out. These guys are piecing off with like any piece of it. Like you get a 3 to fold out, something like that. You're also building a pot sort of towards a very, very strong hand. So I would be double barreling here a lot. I'd also be double barreling even on like a low brick, like a deuce or a 4. Of course, some of these low cards are actually going to give us a straight draw. So I was a little bit surprised after Rysuke checked that Ivey actually checks now behind. So I would have double barreled there a lot, but he checks behind, and now we're off to the river with the pot being just over 13,000. So the river rolls off the jack of clubs, and Phil, obviously checking back the turn, has now made a flush. We still don't know exactly what Rysuke has. So obviously if it checks to us, we're very easily putting in a value bet to the point where some people might not even think that we have many flushes because we didn't barrel sort of a disconnected blank turn. So I'm sure Phil was entirely ready to value bet, but that does not happen. Rysuke is actually going to come out and bet from up front. And just like Persson, he's actually going to overbet the river here, a slight overbet. He goes 15,000 into a pot of about 13,000. Now, if I'm Phil, I look at the board. I love these little flushing spots when you're taking a look at board distribution. We've got 7-6 of clubs here, which is obviously not that high of a flush. I mean, the only real flush that we beat in this particular spot is something like the 5 high flush, right? Like 5 deuce or 5-4. We're losing to the ace high flush, the queen high flush, the 10 high flush, etc., etc. Remember, these guys are fairly wide in the blind. So the fact that Rysuke is coming out and betting so much here at the end is really troublesome in the sense that I don't think he's coming out on the front door flush and betting a hand like 2 pair for this sizing. I don't think he's necessarily betting a hand like queen 10 for this sizing. And I think it's also interesting to note that the straight draws that are on the flop sort of pair up here. Like if he didn't make a straight, like Jack 10, Queen Jack, and I don't think that he's turning those into a bluff here either. So it's really interesting when he takes this type of sizing. Now, if I held the really, really small flush here like Ivey does, I really don't think there's a point to raise. I mean, you can be in situations where your opponent's going to be bluffing a lot. There's no point to raise, or he's going to have you beat. But you also have to realize that in order for a raise to be profitable, it has to get called by worse. So if Rysuke, say, was betting 2 pair or was betting, say, Queen 10, which again, I don't know if he is necessarily for this sizing, and we raise him, if he doesn't call with those hands, then there's really no point for the raise. I just think that combinations wise, especially versus this bet sizing, there are so many flushes that we lose to that this is most likely going to be a square call. Now, if we had the king high flush, it becomes closer. We'd have to look at the other card in our hand in terms of whether or not we would want to raise. And then obviously going down, you know, it sort of still leans it towards just a call as you go further down in sort of the flushing value of your hand. But having one of the worst flushes here, there's just no way that I'm going to raise here. And again, it comes back to really these guys and their overbet tendencies in these particular spots. However, the GOAT does raise, and he is going to make it 50,000, so a little bit less than what we saw from the first hand, but still a kind of a hefty raise, 15 to 50. And, you know, Rysuke here is going to be getting about 2-1 in pot odds. And like I said, I think it's very, very optimistic to think that he has bet here with a hand like 2 pair or straight, and that he's going to call with those hands. Even if he does call some of the time with those hands, or he gets there some of the time with those hands, I still think there's a greater percentage of higher flushes or hands that are just going to bet fold, that are never going to call, where I don't actually think that this raise is profitable against an overbet. But Rysuke calls very, very quickly, and we do a reveal, and the GOAT here value owns himself, which means raises with a hand for value and gets called by better, and chunks off a good little bit there, losing 60 to 70,000 in the hand. And then finally, the last hand I want to take a look at is blind versus blind against Andy Stacks from the night that I actually commentated on. So this is playing 1, 2, 4, and Phil is in the 800 straddle with a 400 big blind ante. And it starts off here with it getting folded around to Andy, who's got king 9 of spades, and he is out of position to Ivey. And he's going to raise it up here to 2,400, and Ivey picks up ace king offsuit. We hadn't seen Ivey do a whole lot of 3-betting, and actually in one of his other appearances from a year ago, he actually overflatted with ace king offsuit, but it did not surprise me here. This is just an auto 3-bet. You can see how deep they're playing, like 475,000 effective. So he goes to 9,000 here. So from 24 to 9. And it's interesting here for Andy. I mean, he's going to be out of position. Normally, against someone that is structuring a decent, I would say, 3-betting range with a bunch of bluffs, king 9 suited probably would be defended in this particular configuration. If you're playing against somebody who's doing a lot of flatting and is not 3-betting so much, I think you could make a case where you might actually fold out here, as crazy as it sounds. On paper, I think that this is definitely a defend. Obviously, you'd want to be in position, but Andy's not going to be in any mood to fold. And he even talked about earlier how he wanted to get into hands with Ivey. So he does make the call, and we go to the flop.
You guys want another thing? Yeah, we'll go. I got a box.
Andy here with a flush draw, and Phil Ivey here with ace king.
Right.
So the board comes out 10 of diamonds, 6 of spades, 4 of spades. And you can see here that Andy has flopped the king high flush draw, and Ivey here again hasn't flopped anything. He doesn't have a spade in his hand. It is blind versus blind. The board is not really all that connected. He also has some backdoor straight draws with, you know, the backdoor Broadway type of hands that could come in on the turn, like a jack or a queen. He also has got the ace of diamonds here too. And that makes a little bit of difference when he's structuring, because if he bets and gets called, he might plow through on a diamond turn. And if he's called again plow through, representing the backdoor flush. I mean, this is kind of the way that you structure these particular situations. Now, I don't think that you always have to c-bet after you 3-bet, but there are a lot of boards where you do, and I just think that I would be doing a lot of c-betting here on this particular board. This is not like if it came out Jack 10, 8, all hearts or something like that. So Andy's going to check. Interesting to see how Andy would have played it if Ivey actually had bet, but you know, much like his MO, from what we've seen, Ivey does a lot of checking when he misses, and we move on to the turn with the pot being just under 19,000.
And it goes check, check, and Andy makes the nuts. And Ivey with ace-king, top.
28.
And Andy overbets here. Overbets the turn. After it went check, check on the flop, knowing that there's a good chance that Ivey might have hit an ace after this action, after checking back the flop. 3-bet pot. Andy taking this large sizing. Ivey checking back the flop as the 3-better. Obviously, Ivey has no spade in his hand, but it's really interesting the sizing here from Andy. Ivey trying to get a read.
So the turn here is the ace of spades, and Andy makes the nuts. He makes the absolute nuts here. And this one is kind of interesting here for Andy too, because you would think you'd be doing a lot of checking. When you take a look at a range that 3-bets pre-flop and then checks back the flop, it contains a lot of ace-x, or your opponent will try to represent ace-x here as a scare card. So even though I'm all for fast playing, for the most part, if I were Andy and this sort of tighter player 3-bet pre and check back the flop, I'm going to be doing a lot of checking to him on the turn so that he will come out and bet that ace-x, or he might represent and bet like king, queen or something like that, as opposed to me just leading out. Instead, though, Andy is again going to come out and overbet. So we see 3 big overbets or decent sized overbets against Ivey. He comes out and he bets 28,000 into 18,700. So like a 1.5x type of bet here. And Phil here doesn't have a spade in his hand. He's not getting great pot odds. I mean, the counter here for Andy is that he can be like, well, I don't want to check raise and sort of scare him out of there. Like maybe if I go for a check raise, maybe he bet folds a hand like ace-4 of hearts, and he might not continue on with like king, queen with the queen of spades or something like that. Whereas if I come out and bet, I might get value from those types of hands. I mean, I think that that would be sort of the contention here. Now, background Ivey does not have a spade in his hand, although even with this overbet sizing here, I would still tend to think on paper that you would want to call at least once here. Obviously, if he had the king of spades in his hand, it's a slam dunk call, but I think it's a little bit tight to just fold when you hit top here, facing even just a 1.5x overbet. I mean, it's not like he bet 4 times the pot here. If we're Andy, will Ivey have some aces up types of hands here when he hits the turn that might be better for him to call with? Sure. Will he sometimes have like an offsuit ace that has a spade in it that might be better for him to call with? Yeah, ace queen, ace jack with the jack of spades. But still, past that, ace king is going to be one of the best hands that you're going to have here. So I think that this is a fairly standard call, and then evaluate at the end. You can call here, play a little bit of Crush Live Poker 5th Street Chicken. It means when you call down on the turn with a medium strength hand and you sort of dare your opponent to bluff at the end. And sometimes you actually fold when the river changes nothing. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of all of No Limit, when the fact that you call the turn and then when the river breaks out and nothing changes, you fold the river, because people seem to think, well, how can you call the turn and then fold the river when there's no change? And they neglect to see the fact that the bet from your opponent is change in itself, and sometimes it's huge change. So you can definitely sometimes do that.
And what a fold there by Ivey. Checks back the flop and just folds to the overbet on the turn, and he is correct. He is correct. Andy with the nuts.
I was very, very surprised here that Phil was tanking so long. I thought for a second he was thinking about raising him when I was doing the commentary. I'm like, what is Phil doing here? I mean, obviously this is blind versus blind. You know, he's going to continue on here in this particular spot, but he's goated, I guess, and he ends up making an incredible fold here without a spade. It was a little bit head scratching in this particular spot. I certainly wasn't expecting it, but obviously he was sort of correct here. And then we sort of hear a little bit of banter.
Got something?
Huh? Had a little something, something. Do you have anything?
Yeah, that's something.
You have something?
So there's 3 hands for you from Phil Ivey. I want to look at the final stats here from these particular nights. Again, he played just on 2 nights, and it really isn't a huge sample size. You can see 26% VPIP. This is from hand night 1, 26-14. And then he lost 192,000. That was from, night 1. Those aren't really bad stats. They're kind of taggy stats, right? It's probably not going to be something that you're going to get invited back to Hustler Casino live game, but they're taggy stats. The second night, he had identical stats again, 26% VPIP and 14% pre-flop raise. The more short-handed, the more hands you're supposed to play, but he is sort of towards the bottom of that whole VPIP thing. And then he lost about 49,000 for the second night. So overall, he was stuck about 241,000 over the 2 nights, but didn't really get mixed up, didn't really play a whole lot of hands, just kind of got blinded off, anteed off a little bit. And those were really the most interesting hands that he played, but it's always really fun to take a look and see how Phil Ivey plays. Hope to see more from him in the future on Hustler Casino Live. Again, check it out as I play the ante game tonight on October 20th, a Thursday, and commentate on the 21st.